What do you mean Linda will own the company? I asked calmly, though my hands were tightly clenched under the table. The chandelier above gave off a warm light, but the mood in the room had suddenly gone cold. My father, Paul Thomas, the man whose company I had worked so hard to save, barely looked up from his plate as he cut into his steak. "Jennifer, let's be honest," he said with a sigh, like he was talking to a child. "You're good at the technical stuff, but leading people? That's not really your strength. We need someone who people look up to. Linda is the best choice." Linda, sitting across from me in her fancy dress, took a sip of her wine with a smug smile. She hadn't done a single thing to help when Paisley Bargain CTR was drowning in debt. But now, when the company was making record profits, she was being given everything. "I created the software that saved this company," I said, my voice sharper now, cutting through the sound of clinking silverware. "Without that, there wouldn't even be a company left for you to hand down." Dad laughed like what I said was a joke. Then he pulled out his wallet, took out a crumpled bill, and tossed it on the table. "For your effort," he said. I stared at the $100 lying between my plate and my untouched glass of wine. $50. For the years I spent working late nights, coding until my eyes hurt. For all the sleepless weeks I spent studying our losses and designing the system that didn't just save us from bankruptcy, it made us leaders in the industry. I had turned Paisley Bargain CTR from a failing company into a $400 million success. And he gave me $50. Mom shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. She looked at me, but said nothing. No one did. I looked at my father, the man I'd admired all my life, the man I had worked so hard to make proud. And at that moment, I understood something clearly. It was never about how hard I worked. It was never about success or loyalty. It was always about control. "I see," I said softly, quieter than I thought it would be. I picked up the $100 bill, looked at it for a moment, then folded it into my napkin. After that, I stood up. "Jennifer, don't be so dramatic," Dad said, waving his hand like it was nothing. I gave a small smile. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm just leaving. It's clear that in this family, I'm just a side character. So I'll step out of the scene." Linda let out a small laugh, clearly amused. "Jennifer," Mom started, but I was already walking out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell or ask for fairness. I just left. The next morning I got to work early, like always. The office looked very different from a year ago. Back then, things were falling apart. People whispering about losing their jobs, managers quitting before the whole company crashed. Now, things were booming. The software I built had changed the entire logistics industry. Tasks that once took weeks could now be done in minutes. We had expanded worldwide and signed deals with top clients. But something felt strange that day. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed people giving each other nervous looks. Conversations stopped when I passed by. When I reached my office, the door was already open. My desk was cleared out. My computer was gone. Even the nameplate that once said Jennifer Thomas, CTO, was missing. Sitting in my chair, flipping through papers like she owned the place, was Linda. She looked up and gave me a bright, fake smile. "Oh, good morning, Jennifer. Didn't Dad tell you? I'll be using this office now. You'll report to me." My stomach sank, but I didn't let it show. "What's my new job?" I asked calmly. Linda tilted her head like she was thinking. Then she shrugged. "We'll figure something out. Maybe something in IT support." "IT support? In the company I saved." She gave a smirk. "Dad actually thinks you should take a break. Relax a little. Maybe work on some hobby projects. But don't worry, you'll still be part of the company in some way." I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. After everything I had done, after all the long nights, hard work, and ideas that kept this company alive, they still wanted me gone. Like I didn't matter. Like I was only worth $100. I looked at my sister, then at the company logo on the glass wall outside my office, Paisley Bargain Center. That name used to mean family, loyalty, and legacy. Now it only meant betrayal. But I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I just nodded. "I understand." Then I turned around and walked out. They thought they had won. They thought I'd leave quietly and disappear. They had no idea what I was about to do. I walked out with my head held high and my heartbeat steady. They thought they had crushed me, that I would take whatever leftovers they gave me, maybe even beg to stay. But as I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, one thought burned in my mind. Watch me. The first thing I did was disappear, but not completely. I still came to work the next day, still sat at the small desk they gave me in the far back corner, next to interns who didn't even know who I was. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I watched. And in less than a week, I saw the truth. Linda was completely lost. She had no idea how to run a company, especially one that had just grown into a multi-million-dollar business. She spent her days in endless meetings, making decisions based on feelings instead of real facts. When department heads tried to give advice, she pushed them out and replaced them with her friends, people who only knew how to match wine with cheese, not run a company. Paisley Bargain's CTR wasn't just weak. It was falling apart again. And they were destroying everything I had built. That's when I made my choice. If they didn't want me at Paisley Bargain's CTR, I'd build something even better. One evening, after most people had gone home, I sat in a coffee shop with three of the smartest people I had ever worked with. There was Timothy, our former CFO, the man who had balanced the budget when the company was drowning in debt. He knew every financial trick in the book. Patricia, the best data analyst in the business, she had built our customer tracking system from the ground up. And Eric, our lead engineer, the only person who understood my software as well as I did. I did remember, because we had built most of that software together at 4 a.m., living off coffee and stress. All three of them had quietly quit in the past month. They weren't fools. They saw what was coming. Jennifer, Timothy said, leaning in with a serious look. What's the plan? I looked at them, then pulled out a folder. Inside was everything I had been working on in secret. We're building something new, I said calmly. I didn't have to convince them. They were ready. There was one important thing Linda and my father had missed. Yes, the original software was under Paisley Bargain's CTR name. Technically, they owned it. But I had written the first version of the code before I ever used it at the company. And the newest version, the one with the most powerful features, I had never uploaded it to their servers. It still belonged to me. For the next month, I worked quietly. I made the software even better, stronger, faster, smarter. Then I pitched it. But not to Paisley Bargain's CTR, to their competitors. In just 4 weeks, I had 3 offers. By the end of the month, I signed a deal. A $100 million contract. Just like that, I wasn't just in competition with Paisley Bargain's CTR, I was on the path to take them down completely. The first sign of trouble at my father's company came quietly. A client who had been with them for over 11 years suddenly canceled their contract. Then another. And another. Linda panicked. She started yelling, firing employees, blaming everyone but herself. But the truth was simple, the industry had moved forward. The newest version of my software, the one I had improved, was now being used by their competitors. Paisley Bargain's CTR was outdated. And I was just getting started. 7 months later, the moment finally came. I was sitting in a beautiful hotel ballroom, sipping champagne, as the final speaker ended their talk. It was the Tech Innovators Gala, one of the biggest events of the year. CEOs, investors, and top executives from all over the world were there. This year, I was the guest of honor. When they announced my name, I stood up and walked onto the stage, my heels clicking on the shiny floor. Tonight, we honor those who are shaping the future of technology, the host said. Jennifer Thomas, the creator of the most advanced logistics software in the market, has changed how global companies run their operations. Her company, Nova Systems, is now worth over $1,000 million. The crowd clapped loudly. But as I looked out into the audience, my eyes landed on 2 familiar faces, my father and Linda, sitting in the back. Their company was once again close to shutting down, and they both knew it. I smiled, not to get revenge, not to hurt them. I smiled because I had finally built something of my own. I had finally learned the lesson they tried so hard to teach me. I didn't need their approval. I had won in my own way. And this time, there was nothing they could do to stop me. It had been exactly 1 year since that painful dinner. 1 year since my father threw a crumpled $100 bill on the table and told me I wasn't good enough. 1 year since my sister smiled smugly, knowing she was being handed something she didn't earn. 1 year since I quietly walked away, only to come back and win everything. Now, as I sat at the head of the Nova Systems conference table, going over our latest report, I couldn't help but smile. Revenue, $640 million. Market share, 65% and still growing. Paisley Bargain's CTR was falling apart. I had slowly taken away every advantage they once had. Their clients had left. Their stock had dropped. And just a week ago, a leaked financial report confirmed the truth. They were about to collapse. Then what I knew would happen finally did. At exactly 10 a.m., my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Jennifer, your father and sister are here to see you." I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. "It's time. Send them in." They walked in quietly, like shadows of their old selves. Linda wore her usual fancy clothes, but even that couldn't hide the tired look in her eyes. My father, who was always confident and in control, looked older and defeated. They had lost. And they knew it. "Jennifer," my father said, trying to sound calm, "we need to talk." I pointed to the chairs in front of me. They paused, probably realizing that for the first time they were walking into my space. But they sat. Linda shifted in her seat, tapping her nails on the armrest. She couldn't even look me in the eyes. Dad sighed. "Look, we've had our differences, but we're still family. Paisley Bargain CTR is in trouble. We need your help." There it was. I let the silence grow longer. I watched them get more uncomfortable. Finally, I spoke. "And what exactly do you want me to do?" Dad leaned in a little. "We're offering you a leadership role. Something important. I admit, we may have judged you too quickly." I tilted my head. "You realize that now?" Linda finally looked up. Her face was tight with stress. "Jennifer, don't be petty. We need you, okay?" I laughed. Really laughed. "You need me?" I said, repeating her words. "That's funny because a year ago, you told me I wasn't good enough to lead anything. You said, Dad once told me I was only good for technical work. And now, he had the nerve to look annoyed. "You know how business works," he said. "Decisions were made. But now we need to move forward. If you come back, we can rebuild Paisley Bargain CTR together." There it was again, control. They didn't actually want me. They wanted to own me. "And what position are you offering me?" I asked, pretending to be curious. Dad sat up straight, like he was about to make some big deal. "You'd be second in command. Right under Linda." I blinked. Then I laughed again, louder this time. Linda's face turned red. "Jennifer, grow up. You created some software, fine. But that doesn't mean you know how to run a company like we do." I stopped laughing. I leaned forward, placed my arms on the desk, and spoke with a voice cold as ice. "Linda," I said quietly, "my company is worth $1,000 million. Yours is about to go bankrupt in a few weeks. Tell me again, which one of us doesn't know how to run a company?" Silence. Pure, perfect silence. Dad cleared his throat. "Jennifer, please." That word, please. The same man who once belittled me, who tossed money at me like I was nothing, was now begging. And I had never felt more calm. "No," I said. Linda's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" I said no. I repeated. "I don't need Paisley Bargain Center. You needed me, and you threw me away. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Dad let out a sharp breath. He was clearly getting upset. "You're really going to let your own family fail?" "I didn't let anything happen," I replied smoothly. "You destroyed the company the moment you put Linda in charge." Linda pushed her chair back and stood up, her face burning red. "You're just bitter," she said sharply. "You've always been jealous of me." I smiled, slow and amused. "Jealous," I repeated. "Linda, I don't need to be jealous. I already have everything you wanted." I stood up too, brushing down my blouse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real company to run. My father left without saying a word, his face tight with anger. Linda stormed out, but just before she reached the doors, she turned back. I hope you're happy, Jennifer. I met her eyes, calm as ever. I am. She didn't say another word. The doors closed behind her. I sat back down and let out a long breath. They had walked in thinking they could throw a few empty apologies at me and that I'd come running back to fix their mess. They had no idea who I had become. But now, for the first time in my life, I was free. I didn't hide the fact that I enjoyed watching them squirm. But I knew this wasn't the end. Paisley Bargain's CTR was sinking fast. And when a ship goes down, it drags everything and everyone down with it. The only question was, would I let that happen? 5 days later, the news broke. Paisley Bargain CTR had officially declared bankruptcy. It was everywhere: business magazines, online forums, even national news. Former industry giant Paisley Bargain CTR collapses overnight. Poor leadership decisions sink $600 million company. How greed and family drama destroyed Paisley Bargain CTR. And the best part? Every article gave me credit for the company's earlier success. They all said the same thing. Paisley Bargain CTR only survived its first crisis because of the software I had created. And once I left, it was only a matter of time before it all fell apart. I was in a meeting when my assistant, Barbara, knocked on my office door. Jennifer, you'll want to see this, she said, handing me a printed report. I skimmed through it. By the time I reached the last paragraph, a small smirk formed on my lips. Paisley Bargain CTR was being liquidated. Everything was being sold: the headquarters, the remaining assets, even the Thomas name itself. Dad had made desperate choices. He borrowed too much, trying to save the company. And now the banks were taking everything. And the best part? I could buy it all. It felt like perfect, poetic justice. That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, looking out over the city lights. I thought about everything I had been through, how hard I had worked just to be seen, to prove myself to the very people who never believed in me. I had already won. Did I really need to go further? Then I remembered that night 1 year ago when my father tossed a crumpled $100 bill on the table like I was some waitress he barely respected. And just like that, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I made my move. I didn't use an investment firm. I didn't hide behind a third party. I wanted them to know exactly who was taking everything. So I called the bankruptcy attorney myself. I'd like to place a direct bid on all of Paisley Bargain CTR assets, I said, including the name. There was a pause. The attorney seemed surprised. Miss Thomas, do you understand what that means? I smiled. I understand perfectly. A week later, I was sitting in the very same boardroom my father used to rule like a king. Only this time, I was the one in charge. The papers were spread out in front of me, with a sleek black and gold pen resting on top of the final contract. With one signature, Paisley Bargain CTR would belong to me. The empire my father built, the one he never let me lead, was now mine. Linda and Dad sat across from me, both looking pale and tense. Dad looked like he had aged 11 years in just a week. Linda wouldn't even look at me. I still can't believe you're doing this, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Buying a failed company? Taking over a name that doesn't mean much anymore? She frowned. You know what I mean. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers on the polished table. That's funny, I said. A year ago, you didn't think I could lead a company. And now, you think I have too much power? Dad let out a frustrated breath. Jennifer, just sign the damn papers. I picked up the pen, paused, then slowly slid the contract back across the table. Dad blinked. Linda frowned. What's this? Dad asked. A counteroffer, I said. He picked up the papers and started reading the first page. His eyes went wide. You're dissolving Paisley Bargain CTR? Linda gasped. You're shutting it down? I smiled. That's right. My father looked like he might explode. Why would you do that? I leaned forward, calm and steady. Because I never needed Paisley Bargain Center. But I do want one thing. I pointed to a line on the last page. Dad followed my finger and froze. Linda snatched the paper and read it out loud, her voice shaking. All remaining rights to the Thomas name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Nova Systems and permanently retired. She looked up at me, furious. You're not just buying it, you're erasing it. I looked her straight in the eye. Yes. Paisley Bargain CTR would no longer exist. The name would never be used again. The company would never come back. It would simply be gone, just like they tried to erase me. Dad clenched his jaw. You're just doing this to get back at us. No, I said. I'm doing this because some things need to end. I picked up the pen again. This time I signed. And just like that, it was over. The Thomas era was finished. In its place, Nova Systems rose higher than ever. With no competition for my father's failed business, we grew fast, signing major contracts that once belonged to them. Their legacy was erased. Mine was just beginning. 4 months later, I received a letter. No return address, just a plain envelope with a handwritten note inside. It said only one word, Jennifer. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll understand. Dad. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I threw it into the fireplace. As the flames burned the last piece of Paisley Bargain CTR, I smiled. Because now I had finally and completely won. It had been 4 months since I shut down Paisley Bargain CTR forever. 4 months since I signed the papers that made sure the name would never come back. 4 months since my father and sister walked out of that boardroom with nothing. And for the first time since all this began, I felt peace. Nova Systems was thriving. Without any competition from my father's company, we had grown fast, taking over every big client that once made him proud. Revenue, $1,000 million. Market share, 75%. Status, #1 leader in the industry. But it wasn't the numbers that made me proud. What meant the most was walking through my office each morning and seeing a company built on talent, not family connections. People were hired because of what they could do, not because of their last name. This was a company I had built. On my own. Without needing anyone's approval. But no matter how far you move forward, the past has a way of showing up again. Especially when I got the invitation. It came in a plain envelope, a cream-colored card with shiny gold letters. The Thomas Family Annual Gala. I had almost forgotten about it. Every year, for as long as I could remember, my parents threw this huge event. It used to be the biggest night in the industry, back when they still had power. But this year, it wasn't my father hosting. Someone else had taken over. Someone who bought their mansion at auction after the bankruptcy. The invitation was probably sent by mistake. Whoever was running it now clearly didn't know the full story. Still, I didn't throw it away. I made a choice. I was going to the gala, not to show off. Not to get revenge. But to finally close this chapter for good. That night, I arrived wearing a custom black gown, stepping out of my car with calm, quiet confidence. I had nothing to prove. The event was just as fancy as I remembered. Shiny chandeliers, soft music, and rich guests holding champagne like they still ruled the world. But this time, I was the most powerful person in the room. And they all knew it. I could hear the whispers as I walked in. Is that Jennifer Thomas? No. She runs Nova Systems now. Didn't she bring down her father's company? I ignored them. I wasn't there for them. I came for one reason. I saw them, my father and sister. They weren't in the spotlight anymore. No important people were standing around them. No big business talks. Instead, they were off to the side, like a shadow of who they used to be. My father looked smaller than I remembered. The strong presence he once had was gone. And for the first time, I saw something in him I'd never seen before, regret. Linda still stood tall, trying to act confident. But I could see through it. Her fingers were tight around her champagne glass. Her eyes kept glancing at me, then quickly looking away. For the first time ever, I was the one in control. And they both knew it. I walked toward them, the sound of my heels echoing on the floor. Linda froze. My father turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was defeat. Jennifer, he said softly. I had never heard his voice so quiet. I tilted my head. Dad. The silence between us felt long. Then he sighed. I guess this is when you rub it in. I gave a small smile.
No, Dad.
This is when I say goodbye. Linda blinked. What? I didn't come here to brag, I said. I didn't come to remind you of what you lost. That's not my concern anymore. I set my drink on a tray as a waiter passed and looked into my father's eyes one last time. For years, I tried so hard to make you proud, to show you I was enough. I took a slow breath. But I don't need that anymore. I turned to Linda. And I don't hate you. I never did. I just feel sorry for you. Her face tensed. Because, unlike you, I didn't need to take power from someone else. I built my own. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something. But nothing came out. For the first time, she was speechless. I looked at both of them one last time. Then I walked away. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge. But because for the first time in my life, I was free. I left the gala without looking back. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Because this was never about revenge. It was about becoming the person I was meant to be. And as I got into my car, heading back to my company, my future, and the life I had built with my own hands, I smiled. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.